You're listening to Three Things to Know with Stephanie Haney, with experts and insiders on what you need to know in Northeast Ohio.
Hi there, everybody. Welcome back to the Three Things to Know podcast. I'm your host, Stephanie Haney, and as always, I am thrilled to have you here. Thank you for choosing to hang out with me for a little bit and talk about some stuff. And I need to say thank you, by the way, to everyone who donated to my personal fundraiser for Velasano for the Cleveland Clinic Cancer Research Fundraiser. It was a great biking event over the weekend. Got out there, rode some miles, and thank you to the people who donated, who enabled me to do some push-ups, because that's something I was doing. I said, for every $10 donated, I would do one push-up on Instagram Live, and I got some reps in. So thank you to everyone who helped raise the money to support cancer research and also help me get a little pump on. All right, let's talk about what we're going to talk about this week. This week, our topic of conversation is a phrase that we're hearing a lot, more and more now: toxic positivity, which is an interesting concept because, I immediately think to myself, how can something that's positive be toxic? But it can. The experts certainly say it can. I know it can certainly feel that way. I've experienced it. Now, I am somebody who tends toward a positive outlook. I am the queen of the silver lining. And I got to check myself on that sometimes, because that's not always what people want. Sometimes people don't want that. Sometimes when someone's coming to you with a struggle or something, they want just to be heard. Sometimes they want advice. Sometimes they do want some positivity, but it's not always what they need. And it can be not great if you are throwing it around when people aren't really here for it. And also, depending on the situation, some things just are not great. Some things are not good. Some things are bad. Some things are terrible. And another thing that we hear a lot of on the converse side of this is we really need to feel all of our feelings. And it's a good thing to feel all of our feelings. So, I'm clearly no expert in this. So that's what we do here on Three Things to Know. We bring in the expert. We get you in the know on this topic. So today we have a great expert. She's coming back to join us again. It's Dr. Susan Albers. She's a psychologist with the Cleveland Clinic. And she's here to sort of help us navigate what toxic positivity is, why it's a negative thing, what the harmful effects of it can be, and how we can sort of check ourselves, recognize it when it's happening, and how we can also be better communicators and let people know, hey, I'm not here for this right now, and how we can kind of deal with the inundation of these positive messages that we see on social media, particularly on Instagram. Instagram is a good one for that. So without further ado, let's bring our expert in to get us in the know on this. She's here now. Dr. Albers, thank you so much for joining us again on the Three Things to Know podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
This is a fascinating topic. I'm so glad you were available to chat with us about this. The concept of toxic positivity, to me, I think, and to a lot of people, that sounds sort of like a misnomer, even combining those words. So I want to ask you, how would you describe toxic positivity?
Toxic positivity is an extreme focus on positive thoughts or mental mindset. And the downside, it sounds nice to be positive and upbeat and focusing on good things, but the downside is that there's a real denial or discouragement of negative emotions. And unfortunately, in our world, we have the good with the bad. We have a lot of negative emotions that occur as well. So it's great to be positive, but we sometimes have to balance that out a little bit.
Mm-hmm. And we are going to dig into all of that today. Now, I want to start, though, very broad base here. As a generally positive person, and I've said this with friends too, I know that I can be annoyingly positive. I know it, and I try to check it. I do. But where do we draw the line between having a general positive outlook and toxic positivity?
Well, you are absolutely right that we need positive thoughts and a positive mindset. In fact, in psychology and clinical research, we found that positive thoughts are helpful in reducing depression, increasing self-esteem, and prevents a lot of mental health disorders. So there's a place for it. In fact, it's a large part of cognitive behavioral therapy. The downside, though, and where we have to draw the limit is, again, that balance between acknowledging that we have both positive and negative feelings, that all feelings need to be welcomed. And when people are overly positive, the downside is that it really invalidates how we feel. And that's where it starts to get tricky and we get into troubled water, because nothing feels worse when our feelings are not validated.
Mm-hmm. And when you're talking about validating feelings, just as a person, maybe on the flip side of this, it becomes sort of, I don't know, I think of it kind of as an authenticity issue, because if you generally are hearing something from someone and you're like, well, but did you consider it this way? Again, that can be annoying. But then also, if someone's telling you something terrible, it can feel disingenuous if you're like, everything will be fine. It can always be worse. So it really is, it's a tough needle to thread there.
It is. And when we have some negative feelings in our lives, all we're really seeking sometimes is some validation. And as you're saying, I see this pop up a lot in therapy, because people are often coming in. They're often coming in because they're having a negative experience. Something tragic has happened in their life. And so we can recognize toxic positivity by some of those, what we call like platitudes or trite statements, like, don't worry, be happy, good vibes only, life is good, only focus on the positive. So for example, a few weeks ago, I had a mom come into counseling who had lost her daughter actually to COVID, 20 years old, total shock, very, very sudden. And in part, she was coming in to talk about this loss and the grief that she had experienced. But the other part of it were some of the things that people were saying to her. They were well-intentioned, wanting to be sympathetic and help her cope. But they were some of these toxic positivity statements, things like, at least you had a daughter, or life must go on. And whereas they were trying to provide comfort, it just did not match her experience at all. And so not only had she experienced a trauma, but some of these statements were re-traumatizing in another way.
And then you're trying to figure out how to deal with that and how to be kind and gentle with people, or sometimes maybe not. Sometimes you're like, yo, just stop. But that brings me to, that sort of brings up another topic that I want to touch on here. So that's a very personal experience. That's a one-on-one exchange. But when we're scrolling on social media, on Instagram, oh my gosh, Instagram is king for this.
Yes.
You're seeing all those,
over.
All those platitudes. So is there a difference in impact on us as a person, whether we are just scrolling through Instagram and seeing those sort of toxic positivity statements when we're maybe not feeling like experiencing a toxic message, or when we're getting it one-on-one from person in a particular situation?
Yeah, definitely. There's a time and place for all of those positive messages on Instagram. And just like you were saying, is that when we're in that mood, or we need that little pick me up, or our thoughts redirected, Instagram is a great place. But you can control the scrolling. If it resonates with you, you can stop. If it doesn't, you can scroll on by. You can fill your feed. You can choose and have control over what you see and what you don't see. The hard part with those in-person interactions is though that words sometimes stick like glue, that when we hear them, we can't erase them. Mm-hmm. And so those words that people are saying to us, and they're often more meaningful if they're coming from friends or family, just have a much heavier impact. The ones that we see on Instagram, sometimes they, I liken them to Tylenol. They kind of help with the pain for a little bit, but they don't get to the root of the issue. And when we're talking with someone in person, we can really dive much deeper into what we're truly feeling and what's going on. That Instagram, it's a lot more impersonal.
It is impersonal for sure. And you're right. You can put the phone down if you don't want to. When you're in face to face with someone, or having a conversation, or texting, or however it is you're directly communicating, the myriad of ways that we do that these days, that can be a little tougher. What would you say are the dangers that people need to be aware of when it comes to toxic positivity?
The main danger of toxic positivity is that when we deny feelings for ourselves, or hide them, or ignore them, often they come back with a vengeance. Mm-hmm. They increase and sometimes become expressed in ways that we can't ignore. I see this a lot with eating issues and eating problems, that the more that people sort of stuff down their stress, it pops up in emotional eating or struggles around eating. So there can be some very real danger in not addressing it. Also, it creates this sense of shame and blame, almost kind of I don't want to say victim blaming, but blaming the person that their struggles are only due to their mindset. And sometimes that is just not the reality. It can be a tough situation, and the person has nothing to do with creating that. Their mindset doesn't really matter. It's just a very tragic or difficult situation. And it can prevent people from going to get treatment if they think, oh, well, I'm to blame. If I just change my mindset, things will get better. Sometimes people need real therapy and real help to get through some of their struggles.
Good message there too. We can't be living in denial, and not everything is great all the time. It just isn't.
Yeah.
But I want to also touch on this. You don't want to go too far in the other direction though, right? When you are in that low moment and just like really focus on the negative. So hence that balancing act. And this brings me to another point that I want to talk to you about that I've seen sort of floating around. Are our brains hardwired to be more impacted by negativity? It seems like that's easier to latch onto. Is that a thing?
Oh, it's very true. Our minds are wired in a way to attach to and magnify a lot of negative feelings and emotions. And this seems like this is kind of a challenge. Why would our brains be wired that way? Because it makes it such a challenge in our world. But actually, there's an evolutionary root to it in that it's based on our survival. To get through each day and to survive, we had to be able to pick out where the danger would lie. And so if our brains were attuned to and scanning for any kind of negativity or danger, we were alert and on it. So there's a good reason for it. The downside, and if you look at brain scans, and what's very interesting is that when positive and negative messages and images are put on a screen, our brains, if we were to hook them up to electrodes and look at what's happening on the inside, orients and really lights up much brighter to negative stimulus. So that's very interesting. I mean, that we can see that something's happening even on a biological level. So again, there's an evolutionary reason for it. And this could become sometimes problems in relationships when our brain jumps to the negative instead of giving the benefit of the doubt. So sometimes we do have to balance this out and really train our minds to look for the positives. So again, positivity is not always a negative thing. It just needs to be in balance.
Now, as we're talking about this, I just had this thought. I'm thinking, wow, if our brains are more hardwired toward the negative, how much positivity do we have to be inundated and overwhelmed with until we get to that point where like, this doesn't feel good?
Right. It's almost like, it's kind of like eating cake. If you eat cake, we all love cake, but if you eat cake 3 times a day, it's going to kind of lose its luster. And after a while, you're not going to want any of that cake anymore. My main message to people is all feelings are welcome. All feelings are messages to us. And that's why we need to take the good with the bad. And those feelings that are hard to sit with or deal with, that are negative, are telling us something important. So if you are feeling anxious, you don't want to deny that or tune that out or say, I don't hear you, because it's sending you a message about maybe there's some potential danger. Or if you're feeling angry, you don't want to shut that off and say, oh, I can't be angry today. I'm just going to ignore that, because that anger may give you a message that you are being mistreated. So our feelings inform our actions. So we don't want to turn off those negative feelings because they may be giving you some really important direction.
That's important to remember for sure. And a great message there on why we need to feel all of our feelings. That's to use another Instagram platitude, the comment, it's okay to not be okay. Sit with it. Yeah. Have that feeling, experience it. That's something great for us all to remember, I think. Now, I want to go back to something that we talked about at the very beginning, something you touched on. Toxic positivity as a form of emotional invalidation. How do those two things interplay?
Yeah. Well, whenever we deny or turn off or turn away from feelings, we're invalidating them. Basically, what that means is we're saying that they're not true or they're not okay. And sometimes we do this in really subtle ways and sometimes overt. The most subtle way that we do it is, let's say we're in an interaction with someone and they're angry and we change the subject. That's kind of saying it is not okay to talk about anger, and I'm going to change the subject because I don't want to go there with you. And then sometimes it's very overt ways. It's like, don't be angry. Focus on the positive. Be grateful, things like that. So there's very subtle and overt ways. There's also internal and external. Sometimes we do it to ourselves in saying, hey, I can't be in this negative space. I can't have these negative thoughts. And then sometimes we direct it towards other people in the things that we say and how we direct and validate or invalidate their feelings. So it's really, I think, particularly in psychology and when I'm working with people, it's really understanding and labeling feelings is an important way of validating them, saying that it is okay to feel positive and it is perfectly okay to be sad, depressed, anxious, because that's real.
Okay, so what are some ways that we can be more understanding and mindful of that and try and avoid that toxic positivity pitfall and validate other people's feelings?
Right. So the key number one is to not avoid it. So if someone's talking to you about some negative feelings, to not change the subject, to really listen and to be present, to not shut it down. And like I said, we shut it down in some really, really subtle ways. Even sometimes running away. Somebody says, I can't talk right now, or I'll be back. Most important is language. I think that is what is key to responding and being mindful of how you respond and what you say. Again, your intention is really good. You want to be comforting and understanding, but you can turn some of those phrases around to something that is more validating. So instead of saying, it's not that bad or things will get better, turning that around to saying, this is really hard. I hear you. I'm here for you. If you don't know what to say, simply repeating what you're hearing the other person saying is very validating. And sometimes even verbatim, if they're saying, I'm feeling really angry, saying, I hear that you're feeling very angry, can go a long way. Also, just body language of nodding and leaning in sometimes can be very validating too. Sometimes we turn away from people or we appear not to be listening or disconnect by looking at our phone. So just simply sitting with someone and nodding, silence can be really powerful too, because you give them the space in the room to keep on talking. Sometimes we feel that need to keep on talking on our end, and it shuts down people.
That's such a great message there. Sometimes you don't have to say anything, and I could tell you too, from an interviewing perspective, silence is very powerful. If somebody does have something to say, let them speak, and that can feel very good. It can be very freeing on both ends.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
All right, I want to end this on an empowering note too, because we are more than the circumstances that happen to us. So we have a role in this too. If we feel like we're experiencing some toxic positivity that's coming at us, how can we be better at recognizing that and communicating to someone else what we need in a situation and say, I don't need a joyful message right now. I need something else.
Yeah. And I think coaching is that word that you just said, the word coaching, and that really pops out to me because sometimes people don't know what we need. They can't read our minds and they don't know how those messages land on us. I often think of it like throwing a ball. So if I say something to you and it fits for me, it's like I catch the ball and I throw it back. So if you are observing someone and they kind of catch that phrase or catch that ball and don't throw it back, you know that you're really off. But coaching people, you can say things and let them know how those words landed on you and saying, I know you're trying to be thoughtful and caring, but how it feels to me is that you're not hearing what I'm saying. And so sometimes that just giving them that insight or aha moment that it's what they're intending is not landing in that way can be very helpful. And just giving them some instruction of here's exactly what I need. I need you to know how I'm feeling.
We are not mind readers.
No. Mm-mm.
All right, Dr. Albers, do you have any final tips or thoughts or messages surrounding toxic positivity before we let you go here?
Yeah. Well, I think just recognizing how hard this is. Life is hard. We've hit so many struggles, particularly in this past year. And we really realize that sometimes people are just surviving. They're getting through the day and their mindset doesn't really, sometimes make a difference. It can't really shift things. And so validating that life is hard and can include some suffering is really important and really powerful and very real. So like we said, it's okay not to be okay, and particularly in these times.
It is very real, and we're all about the realness here on Three Things to Know. Dr. Albers, as always, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Dr. Albers just has a way of really simplifying the message and putting things so plainly. So very thankful to have her back here on the Three Things to Know podcast. You know, as we were talking, something that kind of popped into my mind was the concept of gaslighting, and we're not going to talk about that today. That's a concept for another podcast. We should definitely do a podcast. I'll do a podcast on gaslighting because the concept is just, it's fascinating. And if you think you've ever experienced it, this is when, just roughly, the experts say someone sort of challenges your understanding of reality and kind of makes you feel like you're crazy for thinking the things and remembering the things that you see and felt and heard and all of those things that you experienced. But that's kind of what it seems like toxic positivity can feel like a little bit, in my opinion, from my perspective. If you're going through something and then someone else is putting all of this other stuff in your face. So maybe you're going through something that's really difficult for you and someone's like, it's okay, you're going to be okay, but you don't really believe that. That can be really kind of a confusing challenge to have all of those things rattling around in your brain. Could be overwhelming, and we are constantly inundated with messages, with other people's opinions, with other people's perspectives, right? Comments flying at us, people interjecting their opinions, people projecting their experiences onto us. It can be overwhelming. So that brings me to what you need to know in NEO. If that's something that you're experiencing, and even if it's not, here's just something that it's a good time to be had and maybe a good space to clear your mind. If you are interested in outdoor activities, I am going to recommend canoeing the Mohican River in Loudonville. I recently had a week off. The first part of the week got to canoe down the river in Loudonville. It was lovely. One reason it was lovely, I couldn't bring my phone, and it's a good thing that I didn't bring my phone because the canoe did definitely tip over just once, but it did. Lost a couple things, and if my phone had been in that canoe, I definitely would have lost my phone too. So one plus there. You can't really take your phone if you're canoeing down the Mohican River. I guess you can if it's waterproof and you have it in a bag, and there are ways to work around it, but I'm suggesting maybe don't find those workarounds, and you can go through that path. It's quite lovely, and it is a public river, so you can do it yourself if you have your own inner tube or raft or kayak or canoe. I went down it on a canoe, and it was great. But if you don't have gear, you can also rent it from a couple of different places down there. Now, the place that we went was Mohican Adventures. That's their website, mohicanadventures.com. So you can rent it all. There are different length trips. They'll take you, they'll shuttle you to a drop-off point, and then you canoe back down the river to where your vehicle is. And it was very lovely. It was a lovely experience. It was a great way to check out, a great way to just be in that moment and not have all of this external stuff just flying at you, because we rarely get a break from that. Now, when you don't want to break from that, now I have to tell you about a good follow on social media. And this is a man that I've been following for a long time, and I just learned literally today that he is from Cleveland. His name is Timothy Goodman. He is an artist and a muralist, and he just posted today that he was celebrating 17 years living in New York City, but that he is a Cleveland, Ohio native. And now that I know that, I'm going to have to reach out to him, and I'm definitely going to have him as a guest on this podcast if he'll come on and talk to me, because he's a cool dude and a very good follow on Instagram. His Instagram handle is just Timothy Goodman, and what I love about him is the man keeps it real, okay? He uses a lot of words in his murals, in his art, in his artistry, whether it's on a wall in New York City or some other city, or whether it's something he's put together for Instagram. Yes, some of his messages are positive in nature, but then some of it is getting really real, talking about recently how he started taking anti-anxiety medicine again and how he cried when he made that choice, but he made that choice for himself. So you're getting it all from him. It's not a toxic positivity situation. It's a lot of balance. The good with the bad, and really just kind of accepting that sometimes reality is what it is. Here's another thing that I do really enjoy about Timothy Goodman. He really champions inclusivity. And this isn't particularly on topic to the thing that we're talking about today, but this is something that I really appreciate about him, and I want to share it with you so that you know. When he gets asked to be a part of panels, which he often does, at least according to his social media, he makes it a point to ask those people who are asking him if there is diversity on that panel, if there's inclusion on that panel and representation. And if there isn't, not only does he decline the position as a white male, but what he does do is he then recommends a person from a marginalized community that he thinks would be a good fit for that panel if he knows one, or he challenges them to go out and look for that fit and says, book this person in my place. So just a good human in general, at least from what I see on social media. So I am recommending to you Timothy Goodman, a good follow on Instagram, Cleveland native. I've been following him for years. Who knew? And it was quite serendipitous. I was scrolling through social media and I thought, who would be someone who is a good follow to recommend to the listeners of the 3 Things to Know podcast that has something to do with this concept of toxic positivity? And he just popped up right there in my feed like magic. It was like manifesting. That's another topic for a possible podcast in the future. So many topics to talk about. So I hope that you'll come back. I hope you're enjoying it, because obviously we have a lot of things to cover and we do it every week. So if you're enjoying the show, please subscribe. 3 Things to Know podcast on your favorite podcast platform. You can also watch us on YouTube if you're not watching us on YouTube right now. You can do that on the WKYC YouTube page. Leave a comment, leave a review, leave a rating. All of those things help us connect with more people here in Northeast Ohio, and that's really what it's all about. Thanks for hanging out with me, you guys, and I will see you back next week for more 3 Things to Know.
Thanks for listening to 3 Things to Know with Stephanie Haney from WKYC Studios. Subscribe now to stay in the know.